What kind of myths are out there about baby sign?
These baby sign language books on the mass market, they are just making some stuff up out of thin air and just using incorrect signs, and also sometimes signs for the wrong word and labeling it as another.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Growing Intuitive Eaters podcast. Today we have Laura Payne here, and she is a baby sign expert and just a sign language expert. I'm going to let Laura explain her background and credentials because she can do it better than I can. So welcome, Laura. I'm happy to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Taylor. I'm really excited to be here and to talk to you guys about all of this. So yeah, my name is Laura Payne, and I am known as a baby sign language expert. So my background, I am a former teacher of the deaf. So I have both a bachelor's and master's degree in deaf education. And personally, I have known sign language since early elementary school. So kind of like my background, everyone always wants to know, like, well, how did you get into that? You know, do you have a deaf family member or anything like that? Because most do. There's usually a tie somehow to the deaf community. And I don't have anyone in my family that's deaf, but my elementary school housed the deaf program for our school district. And so my grade level had quite a few deaf students part of it. And that is, I became fast friends with many of them, and I learned how to communicate with them because they taught me sign. And then when I went off to college, I have they just left such a big impression on my heart. And so I majored in deaf education, and that is where I studied American Sign Language, or ASL formally. Just really nerded out in all the classes, and it's just a really cool language. And after my master's program, I graduated and started teaching at a public school district here in my area. I'm down in Houston, Texas, and somewhere in this area, and taught. Each year kind of was different. Like anyone in special education umbrella kind of knows, like every year your grade level shifts a little bit, your placement shifts a little bit, just because of how many students you have in different grades and their needs and things like that. And so I taught from 3-year-olds was the youngest group that I taught, and the oldest were 4th graders. So every year looked a little bit different, but I had about 2 to 3 grade levels at a time within that range. And after while I was pregnant with my daughter is when I resigned from the classroom. And after she was born, I joined a mom's group, and they were all like, we have a WhatsApp chat, and we were all chatting about stuff. And some of them wanted to get together to practice some signs that they had learned for baby sign language. I needed friends. I was new to the group. So I was like, here, I'll come hang out. I'd love to join. I can even help teach you guys. And that's kind of where all of this snowballed from. So that's how I've kind of taken my formal credentials in the classroom and formal training in American Sign Language and passion for the deaf community, and then just transitioned it into my role as a mom and kind of busting some myths and breaking down some barriers that many don't realize are going on with this baby sign language approach.
Okay, well, now I have a burning question for you. What is a myth? Like you said, busting myths. What kind of myths are out there about baby sign?
Yes, so a lot of people think that these baby sign language books on the mass market are correct, and baby sign language is also just its own thing. And so turns out that these baby sign language books are being created and mass marketed. If you go and search on Amazon, the top ones that come up, you're like, oh, well, it has all these ratings, it's great, everyone wants it, let me get it. But it turns out they never hired any experts. They are just making some stuff up out of thin air and just using incorrect signs, and also sometimes signs for the wrong word and labeling it as another, which is just really wrong, because you can't call that sign language. Like, sign language is the native language of the deaf culture and community. And so when you change things or you just make things up, you're actually creating gestures, not sign language. So you can use gestures with your child, of course, but that's just not using sign language with your child. So
Interesting.
those myths about that is, like, it needs to, when you're using baby sign language, that doesn't mean that you're changing American Sign Language at all. That just means, and we can kind of get into this a little bit more, but you're borrowing signs from American Sign Language, but still in a way that is honoring and using the language of the deaf culture in a positive way.
Okay, cool. So that's really interesting. I didn't realize there's so much controversy. So why should someone do sign language with their baby at mealtimes? I mean, I talk a lot about it. Well, I talk a little bit about it in my Growing Intuitive Eaters 101 course, but I would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, so just mealtime in general, and probably more on your side of things, like, you want mealtime to be a positive experience, and you want to have your child to have that confidence in, what they're having for their meal and how you're going about it, and just have that positive relationship with food, which I know is really important to your scope as well as many families in their homes, and as with mine. And there's also just so much language rich opportunity there. And so using sign language with babies and toddlers can help those early communication skills, can help that confidence surrounding communication. And your baby and your toddler can oftentimes communicate earlier and more than they can in verbal skills. And so that just aids to more positive interactions. That's helping them become more confident. And you, as a parent, more confident too, because you can be like, oh, that's what they're trying to tell me. So to use that to help along creating this positive experience and all around aspect of your home environment, which is mealtime in the kitchen or at restaurants or wherever, that just really helps play into that whole end goal that we're all trying to achieve.
Yeah. And when you think about it too, when you sit down at a mealtime, like, that's oftentimes some of the longest time that you're sitting and just having like a continuous conversation with your whole family together at one time.
Yes.
So that's probably, like what you said, a language rich opportunity, probably one of the most like rich opportunities throughout the day when you're like just focused on connection and eating.
Absolutely. Because if you have a baby, they're in a high chair, and if you have a toddler, they're in the booster, or an older child, they're in the chair or whatever. So everyone is there focused. And as far as using those signs, they're wanting to eat, they're hungry. And so you just have that interest and that motivation to include signs specifically related to their food they're eating. But then, like, all those conversations about how was your day, and oh, we did this, and you just like even play like some silly games and just make those fun memories around the dinner table or breakfast table, lunch table. There's just so much that can go on that just heightens all those positive experiences.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so you touched on a little bit already about the difference between like baby sign and American Sign Language, which there's other, is dialects the right words? Like, there are other types of sign language, right?
Right. So there's dialects within American Sign Language. So if you kind of think of, let's compare it to English for 2.5 seconds.
Okay.
So English has dialects, as in, like, here in Texas, we say y'all, right. Other places say you guys and things like that. There's also like just phrases that different areas of the country say, different communities say. So those are like dialects, things like that. But just like with English, there's then French and German and Spanish and things. And so, yes, there are different sign languages around the country around the world, sorry. And it doesn't relate to the spoken language of that country either. So here in America, we speak English. English is also spoken in England, but British Sign Language and American Sign Language are totally different.
Interesting. Okay, so if we're in the US and we think of sign language, we typically are thinking of American Sign Language.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So, so ASL is used pretty much in most of North America. So definitely all of the US and most parts of Canada.
Okay. So how is then, obviously there's less words that we usually use with our babies, but what are other ways that baby sign is different from ASL?
Right. So kind of just the goal of it all, right? So for baby sign language, it's a communication tool that you're using during the early years. Okay. Whereas American Sign Language is a full and complete language.
Okay.
So the goals of them are very different, right? Baby Sign Language does use signs from ASL, but ASL is the language that, the native language of the deaf community and culture here in North America. And then, yeah, just like you were saying, you use less signs. So you would typically sign probably anywhere between like 1 to 3 words in your sentence, depending on what your sentence is. Whereas ASL is not just English in the air. It has its own grammar, its own sentence structure. So it's not, you just like Spanish or any other spoken language has its own word order. ASL has its own sign order that's separate from English. And then for, using sign language with your babies and toddlers, your goal as far as like that communication game, like just helping with their communication, you're focusing on that functional language, right? You're not necessarily getting into like parts of an animal, you know what I mean? Like just extremely specific there. You're still staying very broad to help those gross communication needs and wants, right? Whereas ASL gets into that abstract thought and all of that, just like any full language would. Yeah. So think of baby sign language as just using some signs from ASL. And that in its own thing is honestly really weird when you think about it. Like no other language is borrowed in parts for any reason at all from non-native users. Like we don't use French for, let's pick 100 words from French that we need to use just for a few years of our lives to make parenting easier or X, Y, and Z reason easier. But we do that with ASL, with baby and toddler sign language. And so that's why it's one of those, like, we're already borrowing something that's not ours. We don't need to be changing it. We don't need to be making up our own things, thinking that it's too, difficult or complicated for our little ones. It's in perfect condition as it is.
Okay. So, I've got another question for you related to that. So when I think of sign language, I think of like you need a lot of dexterity in your hands. And so that, like, my initial thought is, oh, that must be really hard for a toddler, but you're saying, no, that's not the case. And can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah. So think about like some of our English words, we, from the get-go, with even our newborns, we're talking to them using these words that have some really complicated sounds, some really complicated syllable and intonations and things like that. And we don't change it or not use them because, oh, that's hard for my 6-month-old to understand. We talk to them as if they understand us all day long, and so honestly, the signs don't need to be changed either. But just like with English, your child attempts to say water, and it doesn't sound like water because certain sounds don't even necessarily become mastered until your child is 2 years old, 3 years old, even 4-year-olds. There are some preschoolers that you're like, right. I wasn't exactly sure what that word was. And that's simply because it's not supposed to, like certain sounds just really, there are so many small little muscles in our throat and oral nasal cavities and all of that really just take a lot of years to fine tune. And so like it comes out as wah wah or maybe wah at first, but exactly what your child, it takes, a little bit of time that you're like, you just said wah. What does that mean? Does it mean anything in specific or in particular or whatever? And eventually you figure out, oh, you're trying to say water. You do the exact same thing with sign. So the sign might not look like your correct sign for water, but that doesn't mean that, oh, that was too hard, I should change it.
Oh my gosh. I'm so glad you brought that perspective in, because you're so right. Like, I don't refer to water as wawa when my child pronounces it wrong. I continue to reinforce the correct pronunciation. And
right. And you didn't model it from
right.
when they were in infancy. Like, I know this is going to be a hard word, so let's just change it. Yeah.
Right. No. Wow. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So so for our podcast listeners, Laura, I'm going to ask her in just a moment, or right now actually, to demonstrate some signs, but because you can't see us, she's going to send me a link to add to the show notes of her demonstrating these signs. So if you're listening to this on podcast, head to the show notes for a link. So Laura, what are some of like the most important signs at mealtime? So I think of initially like more, all done, please, thank you. But what are some other things that you recommend, and can you show us the correct way to sign those?
Yes, absolutely. I like that you also included please and thank you. Those are good ones too. Let me, I'm actually going to write them down so that I remember to include them in that tutorial. Okay, yeah. So let's talk about eat at first. So whenever you're signing though, you do want to be using your dominant hand. So that's the hand that you write with. So I'm right-handed, just for us on YouTube that can see this. And then for the podcast listeners, when you're watching the videos that we've got in the show notes, you'll kind of know that I'm using my right hand primarily. So yeah, your dominant hand's doing most of the work. And if there's ever like a sign with only one hand, that's the one you'll use. So eat is like this flat O hand shape. It's not a total circle, and it's not totally like smushed down on top of each other. It's kind of just like this good little flat O, and you're going to tap underneath your chin, mouth, chin, anywhere in there. I usually do it more on my chin because you're also talking while you do that. And that's another difference between baby sign and ASL. ASL, you don't use your voice. It doesn't rely on mouthing the words or anything like that because it's in totally different word order than English and doesn't rely on English at all. Whereas baby sign, you're talking while you're signing. And so it's better to just kind of lower it a little bit. So when you say eat, they can see that. But this is also the same sign as food. So here on the side, let me move my hair there. It looks like that. Eat and food.
Say eat.
Yes.
Okay.
Eat. And then more is that same handshake, that same flat O handshake, but this time with both of your hands and your fingertips tap together twice. More. And this is a good one that will typically look like clapping, or maybe your child may do their two index fingers tapping each other. Because yeah, like we were talking about, it doesn't necessarily always look like your sign. So you kind of just keep an eye out for, oh, one aspect of these kind of looks like mine. That's probably what they're trying to say. So like that movement of two hands coming together is most likely what it'll look like for your child. And then water is a W hand shape. So it looks like you're throwing up the number 3. This is actually not the number 3 in sign language, but the hearing 3 is what I call it. This is the hearing 3, the letter W. And your index finger is going to tap on your chin twice. Water.
Okay.
Water. And then all done or finished, same sign for those two words. You're taking your number 5 handshake with both of your hands and you're twisting them. And honestly, you're twisting like from your elbow. So your entire forearm is rotating. Finish. So it's not like moving out. So you're not like extending your wingspan. Hey, you see some interesting variations of this. So it's really just keeping it still like that. Perfect. All done. And my son is currently babbling all done quite a bit, and his little fingers will just kind of go on the sides of the high chair. Like
my son very aggressively like flaps his hands.
Yes.
Especially at diaper changes. He's not like diaper changes, so he
and
like
he's
flaps
like, Mom, I'm done.
Yes.
And it was really funny. This was my daughter's very first sign, and she like tapped in and then like tapped out. So she like slapped her high chair, signed it like very intently, staring at her hand, and then like tapped out. And she was like, the end. You know, almost like giving a signal at a baseball game or something. It was really
like, everybody
really
look at me, I have something to say.
Yeah. Okay, my meeting starts. All right, I'm done. How was that? Mom, are you proud? You know. And then please and thank you. Those are actually really good ones. Let me move my computer screen here just a smidge so you can see me. So we're gonna use a blade hand shape. So it's like the number 5, but your forefingers are glued and your thumb is extended, and it goes on your chest, and you're going to make a circle. The important thing on this is that the circle that you do it like 2 times on your chest is going to the opposite shoulder. So you're not, when you're doing that circle, you're not coming back on yourself like that, but instead you're going forward. So my right hand is going like pointing towards my left shoulder and then down and around.
Does it mean something going the other way?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
It's almost like as if, sometimes it does though. Like sometimes it's a PG change of meaning, other times it's rated R. But in this instance, it just doesn't mean anything. Okay. So it's almost like saying the word wrong or something like that. And then the sign for thank you, you're going to use that same hand shape we just used, that blade with your thumb extended, and it goes on your chin, not under your chin, because that goes rated R, but on your chin and then comes out forward. But don't freak out if your child is doing it under their chin. That's actually a gesture. It's not a sign, but we all know what that gesture means. But don't freak out and be like, oh my gosh, my child is saying the wrong thing. It's totally okay. Like they'll get there. They'll get there.
Okay. So now we talked about broccoli in my stories today. So I'm gonna ask you like 3 foods. Is that okay?
Yes. Okay, now, not every food necessarily has an actual sign. So
oh, really? Okay.
Some of them are just finger spelled, like you spell them in the air. So I'll let you know. Yeah.
Okay. So I was thinking like broccoli, bread, and let's do milk too.
Oh, milk would be good. Yeah. So milk, it's like you're squeezing. So it's kind of like the C hand shape, and then you squeeze it to a fist. Milk, and you do it twice.
That actually reminds me of like when you're milking a cow's udder. Is that where that sign originated from?
It did.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Cool. And you know, if you're a nursing mom or breastfeeding,
sometimes they grab you,
mom, but you kind of feel like, you're the milking of the cow. Yeah, a little bit. So.
Okay. And now what about broccoli?
So broccoli actually doesn't have like a true ASL sign, but a lot of people will kind of, even in the deaf community, it's just one of those that's used so often that they kind of adopt like a little bit of an English attempt at it to help the communication, because finger spelling broccoli over and over, I mean, it just gets old. You know what I mean? Right. So some people will use this letter B hand shape. So it's really the number 4 with all of your fingers glued together. And it's like it's growing out of your non-dominant hand. So my left hand has that C hand shape as if it's like the top of the soil coming out, broccoli.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, but again, that's like a pretty English variation of that sign for this whole need of that. But and then what was your other one? Bread?
Bread, yeah.
Okay, yes. So my left non-dominant hand is just kind of like that blade hand shape, and my dominant hand is a bent blade. So it's bent there at my first knuckles, and it's like you're slicing that bread. So you're going down in front on the outside of, not on your palm side, but on the outside, going from wrist area to fingertips. So you're like slicing the bread like 3 or 4 times.
Okay,
so,
cool.
Bread. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. Okay, this has been so enlightening so far. So I have 2 more questions for you. So first, so you mentioned like that we shouldn't alter the way we teach signs because it's like changing the word, and we wouldn't do that with the English language or any other spoken language. So if your child signs it incorrectly, is there anything we should be doing other than modeling, or is modeling the best thing that we can do to help them learn the correct sign?
Modeling definitely goes a good stretch of the way. And that honestly is kind of my most recommended thing to do is, to still model it. Now, approximations are totally, like part of development. And so when your child does, let's say for water, they just like slap kind of in front of their mouth with their whole hand, right? They're kind of like, just hitting in front of their mouth or something like that, or maybe even tapping it with their index finger. I want you to still, like praise and celebrate that approximation and the fact that they're communicating with you in a more productive way, just something that's more ideal than like the grunting or the crying or the screaming or the pointing and all the other things, right? And definitely respond, like give them that water. And if you're not quite sure, offer that water. See if that is what they say, because, like water and food and eat are right there near each other. And so your child's approximation may look the same or very similar for both of those words. And you're like, well, maybe do you want water? Is it that you want, more food? So you could offer both and see, but definitely respond to it. But, you definitely could correct depending on your child's age. And so, if let's say that you have like, your son, I think is 11 months old, 10 or 11 months old. For that age, I wouldn't worry about it. They're still like learning that, oh, this is the way that I can communicate. So exactly, I would just model, oh, you want water? Okay, here you go. And try doing that and just model that's water. That's right. Look, you're drinking water, and keep it going and keep it positive, right?
Okay.
But if you were to have potentially a 16 to 17 month old and they're still using all of their hands tapping around their mouth, that's when you can say, you can break it down a little bit and attempt to correct them a smidge, but still in a positive way that's not, withholding anything or feeling like, oh, mommy won't or daddy won't accept this sign from me anymore, right? So you could potentially like highlight a little bit of the specifics. Like if they're tapping their whole, the whole area here, you could move it down to where it's more like specified on their chin. You could maybe get them to try that W hand shape a little bit more. You could like maybe try to help them form that hand shape. They may not be willing. Like my daughter hated her hands being touched. And so that's something that you shouldn't force. Because again, just like with mealtime, you want things to be positive, also surrounding this need to communicate via sign. So, but maybe you could get that number one. But yeah, just correct, definitely model it correctly and let the sign evolve on its own with just a few pointers here and there as they enter those later toddler. Like after they've hit the 1.5 month mark, I think you could kind of help pinpoint a few
1.5 year mark.
A little bit. Yes, sorry, not month.
Yeah, I was like, that's pretty young. Okay, yeah, no. So one more question before we wrap up today. So obviously sign language is like, for parents who are using this as baby sign, is a wonderful gift from the deaf and hard of hearing communities. So how can we be an ally to the deaf community? Because you talked a little bit about that, but for our listeners, could you educate us more on that?
Absolutely. So I think the main thing is to help just break this, when you want to use baby sign language for your child, I think the first step that we need to take is starting to identify and just talk about how these books that are on the mass market that are just inventing their own and creating and making up things is wrong. And so as much as I can help spread the awareness of stop buying these, because book 1 versus book 2, they're going to contradict one another because no one makes up things consistently. And so you're just going to feel more overwhelmed and anxious and confused about, well, what sign's right? And I don't know what this is. So there's that component. If you do want to use sign language for your child, definitely look into someone who does have full training in American Sign Language, who is an expert in the field and isn't just trying to teach you signs, but also the strategies of how to do it. So that's the sign language component of it. But as far as, the deaf and hard of hearing community, I would definitely say if you have any interest in learning ASL as the language, like not just baby sign language, but ASL as a whole, look to the deaf community. There are quite a few instructors out there that are deaf. Like I learned from deaf professors, and that is exactly like I will have followers reach out on Instagram and ask me like, oh, where can I take this? Or do you tutor or things like that? And I just direct them to deaf people as much as I can, or universities or community colleges that have deaf professors and deaf staff. That's definitely where I recommend you go for that. And if anyone's on Instagram and wants to check out some of these accounts, the ASL Lab is great. He kind of will break down some signs and talk about their origin and some stories behind them and things like that. And then also Language Priority is a girl. She's a deaf teacher of the deaf as well, and she takes on virtual classes to teach hearing people ASL. So that's a great, and it's very affordable. So a great way to learn ASL, and especially right now, so many things have turned into the virtual space, that those are great deaf accounts that I recommend. And then also, supporting deaf-owned businesses as well. So many people love the all the Etsy shops with the different vinyl things on shirts and whatnot, and they're not necessarily going to supporting a deaf-owned company or business for that matter. And I really do like, her name is on Instagram, Girl in Creativity. She makes just that, and some really cute tees and apparel and accessories and things like that. So if you want something that says something in sign, you should use someone who's actually using their own language for that, I think. And then there's a company who has created board books for early literacy for like our babies and toddlers, and they are beautiful board books. I've purchased all 3 of them, and they're coming out with more, but the books are written in English and they rhyme when they are signed in ASL. And so it's so cool. So yeah, so ASL has like poetry and rhyme and rhythm and all of that. That's a totally different topic, but it's also very beautiful. But all the illustrators are deaf artists, and then there's a QR code in each of the books to take you to a video tutorial for you to learn how to sign the words in the book, so that you can learn how they actually rhyme in ASL. So yes, it's wonderful for, deaf babies and toddlers, but also hearing babies and toddlers who want to learn another language or about another language, or just the baby sign language component as well.
Awesome. That's so interesting. I'm glad you shared those resources.
Yes, of course.
So thank you so much for chatting with us today, Laura. Can you please share where people can find you and connect with you if they want to learn more from you and see what you've got on Instagram?
Absolutely. So on Instagram, I am there's a period in there, mybaby.signs. And my website is laurapayneco.com. But I, am just here to break that barrier and kind of detach people from these mass marketed baby sign language books. Because and I didn't know this, like when I first started teaching and talking to friends and using sign language with my daughter, I was buying the books too, thinking like, oh, this would be so fun to like read these books and my husband to learn too. And it wasn't until they were in my home that I was like, oh, this is not okay. And, I needed to take it, to social media to start spreading awareness about it. And then, if you're interested in working with your child and using sign language with them, I've got quite a few resources for you. The main one that really dives deep into the foundational elements of baby sign language to really set you up for success and get you many of those functional signs like we've talked about is called Look Who's Signing Now. And I teach it live, like maybe once to twice a year, just to like revamp everything, but otherwise it's available as an e-course. And so you can get it at any time for that. I also do some seasonal workshops, for sign while you're doing play and meaningful activities, because that's when your child is the most interested and motivated and engaged. And so you can really add on vocabulary for them. And you don't have to wait until your child has X number of functional signs. You can definitely use them in tandem. So I do those every season. So summer, spring, winter, and fall as well. So each season I release those. And I've got a few other little e-courses and mini courses available for you, as well as like just strategy support. So if you need to just jump on a call with me and we can help troubleshoot or get you, past a stumbling block or something like that, I'm always there as a resource.
Well, you have lots of resources, so thank you.
I'm
Please head to Laura's Instagram page and give her a follow. She's been a great resource to me, and I'm like, this conversation was really interesting. I'm really glad I chatted because I never really have like deep dived into baby sign beyond just the couple that I use at mealtimes. So this is really helpful. Thank you.
Of
Thank you
course,
for shedding light on
yes.
this issue. I'm really glad that you could share it with all of us.
And thank you so much for having me. I hope, more value goes to more people.